Hello, welcome to Picture Me Coding with Eric Aker and Mike Mall. Hi, Mike.
Hey there.
Mike, today's topic I'm excited about. We have a couple of guests on the show, Bobak, Farzin, and Kevin Fahey. Bob's been on the show a number of times, and Kevin, first time joining us, but you and I both know Kevin pretty well. We worked with him for a number of years. Welcome, Bob. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you.
Hey, Eric. Glad to be here.
Now, the reason Mike and I wanted to have you on the show is we wanted to talk about vibe coding. And both of you have interesting perspectives and recent experience using these tools, but you kind of come at it from different backgrounds. So we want to talk about vibe coding, what it is, how you see it moving forward, how it's augmenting the work that you're doing now. I guess we should probably talk about what vibe coding means, where it comes from. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I think we should probably make an attempt, talk a little bit about how Karpathy coined the term and try to get a sense of what he meant by it.
Karpathy. Who's that guy?
Yeah, so this sort of famous LLM guy started out at, where was he, Bob?
He was at Stanford. He was teaching vision at Stanford, as I recall. And then he ended up at Tesla for quite a while.
Tesla, yeah.
Reinvented
right.
a bunch of stuff there. And subsequently, I'm not sure where he went. He might have had a role before Tesla while he was at Stanford.
Anyway, he's kind of an internet famous LLM guy. Lots of interesting YouTube videos on the technology that I encourage people to watch.
And he's also got a couple tweets, one of which coined this term vibe coding, which has really taken off. These tweets have like millions of views. He says, there's a new kind of coding I call, quote, vibe coding, where you fully give into the vibes, embracing exponentials and forgetting that the code even exists. He had a really famous tweet in 2023 where he said the hottest new programming language is English. And this was retweeted millions of times. He says vibe coding, not really coding. I just see things, say things, run things, and copy paste things. And it mostly works. It's not too bad for throwaway weekend projects. Kevin, Bob, any takes on this definition? Does it jibe with your idea of coding by vibes?
It sounds about right for me. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you go in with a half-baked idea and just see where it goes.
Yeah, I think I would agree. Generally, I hear what he's saying with vibe coding. It doesn't exactly fit with some of the things I'm doing, but we'll probably get to that later.
The part that I think I struggle with the most here is the embracing of the exponentials.
That sounds kind of VC talk to me. It sounds like meaningless, like get all Bayesian and throw the money down, and the kind of crap that they say.
I interpret it as, changing your mindset and letting the technology do its thing. And I think as somebody who's been doing this stuff for 45 years, I sort of assume that the computer's going to do something wrong. So it's hard for me to trust it and just let it go.
Yeah, I had a contrasting quote from Simon Willison. Simon Willison, pretty well known in the Python community, and he has built a CLI tool to rapidly do run prompts and predictions. And Simon wrote, if an LLM wrote every line of your code, but you've reviewed, tested, and understood it all, that's not vibe coding in my book. That's using an LLM as a typing assistant. I find this quote interesting, if not a little bit too gratifying, because I often don't trust the output, and I do have to review, test, and understand every line. And he says if I'm doing that, I'm not vibe coding. Maybe I'm not. But I want to actually start with Kevin's experience. Kevin, I was really excited you had time to come on the show today. Can you tell us, and I think the reasons for that will become clear, can you tell us about your experience working with developers, what your professional experience has been, and like how you kind of came to these tools, Cursor or Claude Code or whatever you're using nowadays?
Yeah, sounds good. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I guess just briefly, my just general background. I got my start graduating into marketing, and eventually that led into product roles. And so I got to work with Mike and Eric in a couple different roles over the years. But in the product role, really, my focus was trying to figure out what to build for customers. Right. A lot of that early on was, how quickly can we get ideas out there and tested? And so I found myself early into the process trying to figure out how to get around bottlenecks and quickly get things together. So, as early as, building prototypes in Microsoft PowerPoint, which sounds weird, but it was a thing just to get ideas on screens in front of people. And then sort of over the years, adopted a variety of different low code, no code type approaches. Eventually found tools like Balsamiq and Axure, where I was able to actually build interactive prototypes, which kind of look and feel like real websites and applications. And I mentioned, one time I had a customer, they were startled to find out that this wasn't actually a real application, which is great for a product person because we're always trying to figure out how to mimic a real environment to get real feedback. And over the years, just kind of played and tinkered with all sorts of tools like that kind of give me the ability to get real things out there. And eventually, I think the first sort of real low-code, no-code tool that I jumped into was Bubble.io. Eric, you probably remember this one well. And this was, this was a, working at a company, and there was a need. We were missing something that a lot of our competitors had. Went away on vacation and got bored and decided I wanted to see if I could cobble something together that might be functional. Found Bubble.io, and over the course of roughly a week, had a working application. So the Bubble allowed me to.
Sorry, but that was like a real database-driven web application that you built without writing any code.
Exactly. Yeah. So they allowed me to create database tables and to create a front end with inputs and determine when and what to send to the back end. And given I had worked closely with various tech teams, I had I'd say a general idea of how these things work. Obviously not at the level that you guys work at, but enough to know how to kind of put these pieces together generally. And Bubble had kind of created this front end that made it super easy to drop an element, select an input, and then tell the system what to do. So that was super interesting.
Kevin, I gotta say, your experience in this direction is kind of weird. Maybe that's too, it's unique. Like I've never worked with anybody else who worked with developers who did as much software development as you did without ever writing any code. You always were bringing new and interesting tools. I mean, I'd never heard of Bubble, but I had never heard of half a dozen things that you have worked with, or even like you mentioned, Balsam. I'd never heard of any of this stuff. You went out and found it.
Yeah.
So that seems like an uncommon kind of path to take.
Yeah, I think there's just a force to create and to move things forward and to try to find ways to have an impact in the business. And there's always this sort of waiting period. Like you have this idea, and then how do you actually get this idea to a place where someone can like tangibly see it and interact with it? And that waiting period it's for me it's frustrating because I want to take this idea and immediately put it to paper and put it in front of someone. And so I think that's kind of where this force to find things that just allowed me to just do it myself kind of came from.
And you come to Mike and I with your requests, and we're pretty slow. We're just not fast enough.
The whole sort of mantra with product development is you gotta figure out how to learn as much as you can as quickly as possible and minimize how much money you spend in that learning process, right? So if you have to if you have to go through a development team to get a concept out, you're immediately spending money. You're taking cycles for development. As much as you can minimize that on the front end to just get some learnings into the building, I think the better. So, I think that kind of takes us to my more recent work with Cursor and Claude Code.
So you mentioned Cursor or Claude Code? You used one or both of those?
Yeah, so I started with Cursor. And I think it was probably just seeing people start to talk about it, so various social channels that I'm in. Cursor was obviously getting a lot of, building up a lot of momentum amongst the others out there like Lovable. I don't really know exactly why I chose Cursor first as like the playground, but that's where I kind of started in. And the reason why I decided to even do this was I've started this business recently, and I basically want to just automate some really crappy tasks that I had to do. I had some annoying back-end work, and I knew this stuff is possible, and I didn't, this is a new bootstrap business. I didn't want to hire someone to do this. So I wanted to see like what I could do, and how far I could take it. So I started with Cursor. The first experience sort of loading it up, all I wanted to do was to automate this one thing. And there's just, I won't bore you with the details of it, but it's basically, I need to go out and get process invoices and get signatures on waivers. And it's just sort of like this, manual copy paste email load thing. And I'm like, I can get all of this off my plate.
But you're the user, you're the customer, or you have other users in mind?
I am the user. So I'm just building a system for myself, right?
Okay. Okay.
And
Okay.
but other people interact with it. So I have sent things out for signature, for example, for some of our subcontracts that we work with.
It sounds decently complicated to start, even though you have one user. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it is decently complicated for sure. The magical moment for me was I spent really 3 hours, and really what I did was I asked it, first, like, help me think through how to do this. It wasn't like just start writing this thing. And so basically it came together with a plan, and the plan kind of started with, well, hey, first you need to define this data scheme. I'm like, yeah, that sounds right. What are the data objects that we need to think through here? How are they connected? And so we kind of, within a half hour, 45 minutes, worked through that. And then we had a working data schema, and then I asked it, okay, now I need, what would a front end experience be? And I just kind of gave it a list of things that I need to see this, and I need to be able to do this, and it's just sort of like a list of functional requirements for this thing. I think we can get into this a little bit later, but there's this like concept, that I've been hearing a lot of people talk about, which is totally true. There's just like this one shot, like sometimes it gets it right the first time, and it created this interface that was like, this is amazing. Like, this is exactly what I was hoping to get.
So I was reading this thing by Armin Ronacher recently where he was talking about Claude Code, and he mentioned what he called YOLO mode. Basically, the idea there is that you give the tool permissions to do anything that you could do. So one thing I'm curious about in your experience is how much permission do you have to give the tool? Do you have to keep telling it, yes, it's okay to do that, or do you at some point just give it free rein?
So I initially started with no permission. So everything it wants to do, I have to accept it or approve it. I did experiment with just kind of letting it go, because I was thinking, like, I'm really not, every once in a while I'll like refine the instruction because it's not completely correct, but it's really me. And Eric probably saw this when we were working together. Like, it's really kind of me hitting a button, like, okay, that sounds good. I did let it do its own thing for a little bit. So one, it does give you sort of a scary message, like they're not responsible for what it attempts to inject in this process, which I didn't love. And I did have an experience once where it deleted a bunch of code that it shouldn't have. And so now I do take a little bit more time. I make it prompt me, and I accept, what it's delivering. 95% of the time I'm just like, yeah, that sounds good. But
I have a question, but I want to see if Bob wants to jump in. Bob, what's your take on here in this story?
I can relate to a lot of what Kevin has to say here. I think that I can walk through a little bit of my background also and kind of get you guys up to speed when you're ready. But this idea of using these tools to help plot out what it is that you want to do, think through what it should work on, and then also allowing it to code, but kind of watching it as it goes. Some tasks I feel like I'm just accepting everything and I should have just let it run. Other tasks it goes to do the first thing and I have to correct it. I realize what I've said was totally wrong and I need to like go back and rework that, start a new context, shut it all down and reboot it again. Like any new programming task, I always find it's a good idea to set a checkpoint in Git and check out a new branch and start playing around with stuff, because sometimes it gets so bonkers I just trash it. I just throw it out. And I have another friend who I've been working with and collaborating on some of my projects with, and he's actually set up a whole system where he sets up a Docker instance and then he lets it YOLO just on that instance, and it can install and do anything it wants in that sandbox. And then when it's done, it comes back to him and says, I've got this done. And I would say 25% of the time, he just trashes the whole instance. He's like, yeah, this is garbage. It just totally went off the rails somewhere. But we can come back around to this. The productivity gains on some of the things that work are kind of magical. And so like Kevin was describing, there's times where you just say, sometimes it's a little vague, but you give it some context. You're like, I want you to build X. And it actually gets it really close to your mark. And to what you said, Eric, at the beginning, to some degree, it's just a very fast typist. It would just have taken me 2 hours to write all of that out and go slowly and get distracted. And instead of that, I have a version. And now I can modify and adjust that version from there. So for some of my use cases, it's been really transformative.
And if I could add one thing to that too, Bob, I think interestingly, like sometimes it's perfectly what I had in mind, which is fun, but also like there are moments where it actually comes up with something I hadn't thought about. It's sort of like it's making an assumption and making a decision, and I'm like, actually, I kind of like that. I like what you did there. And then so I'll go back and say, you know what, I want to use that back over here on this other thing that we were working on, and I start to like pull these pieces together that in interesting ways that I hadn't thought about.
Can you walk us through, Kevin? I think it's possible that there are people listening to us who haven't used these tools. Probably a lot of them have, but it's possible they haven't. And they have trouble imagining how what we're sort of talking about, that people have described agentic workflows. We fortunately haven't even used that word. I just dropped it. Sorry. How do you go from I've got this tool that generates a lot of text, it generates a lot of code, to I have a thing that works? There's some missing steps in there that maybe we should illustrate for people so they can kind of have a picture in their minds of what's happening. It's writing code. It's then doing stuff. Bob's talking about you've got a Docker instance. It's doing stuff. What's the doing stuff part?
Yeah. So for me, I mean, I again, I'm the least technical on this podcast here today. I'll be happy to admit that. So I actually have I had Cursor walk me through, like, what would you do? Like, what do you need to do? And so it gave me some options, for example, on how to set up the database, where to go. I told them I didn't want to spend a bunch of money. I'd rather just start this thing locally. So I ended up getting a Kubernetes, setup, and it gives you step by step. Do this, go here, create this account based on the service. Like, oh, grab this key and put it here. So it really.
But not only that, when you say it gives you step by step, it says, I want to run this command in your shell.
Yep.
Is that okay? And you click, yes, it's okay. And then it runs the command. And here's the crazy part. When I saw you doing this, Kevin, it's reading the output from the command and automatically feeding that back in as a new prompt. Did it work? Oh, it didn't work. I will try to figure that out. I will try to run it again. Oh, it worked. Let's move on to the next thing. That's bizarre. That's surprising as a software developer who types crap into the terminal all day long.
Yeah, and it's reading the terminal logs. I mean, it's able to really, when it's making mistakes. Now, sometimes for some reason it doesn't see the issue, and you have to say, actually, like, this thing's happening, and I'll do a copy paste. A lot of time I'll spend a bunch of my time, in the console and the browser, and feeding it, because it can't reach into that domain yet. Maybe it can, and I haven't figured out how to hook it up, but I'm sort of feedback to them, to the model, and helping it sort of recalibrate things as we go along.
What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, my experience has been similar, but I think I suffer from hyper-skepticism around these things. I had been using Copilot for quite a while, but my first experience with what could be considered vibe coding was also Cursor. Like, I was really astonished by what it could do on a React app. So I was working on a React app with TypeScript, and I really don't know what I'm doing there. It's just not my domain. Just one day I decided to say, let's see what'll happen if I try these things. And I said, rearrange this code the way that a real React programmer would do, and then restyle the CSS so that it looks better. And it just did it. I was like, wow. That was amazing. But then I also had experiences where I was trying to get an algorithm to make it cycle through colors when it was doing charts, and it just couldn't do it. And the more I explained it over and over, no, that's not what I want. And it just kept going back to the same solution. So there do seem to be rabbit holes where the training set just isn't sufficient for what you want it to do.
Well, I want to go to Bob's experience next, but I got to say, before we leave your example, Kevin, here's the thing that blew me away about it. You showed me this. I was pretty shocked by what you had, honestly, shocked. The thing that shocked me was not that it had written a bunch of working code that actually runs successfully. It had written Python, it had written vanilla JavaScript, it had written CSS, and you had a working web application on your machine. Here's what shocked me. You needed to interact with real third-party services that need to send your app webhooks. How are they going to do that on your machine? You're behind a router, you're behind a firewall or whatever. Cursor was like, oh, I know how to solve that. We'll install ngrok, a tool that will open a port on your machine and register it so that we can fire webhooks to your local instance of your web app running on your machine. Oh, and by the way, you want PostgreSQL? I will install Docker for you. I will launch a PostgreSQL Docker container. I will set up your tables, and then I'll make your app run on top of it. And it also, by the way, wrote you a client for like a DocuSign thing. To me, the ngrok thing was the most out of left field. Like, whoa, that is not, it's not just like it wrote you a code base, a repo, and said, here you go, Kevin. If you figure out how to deploy this onto the public web and you connect it to a database, this will work fine. It made it all work on your machine, and you can even get webhooks on your machine. I was just like shocked that happened.
And honestly, like what you're describing too, I don't have an appreciation for something like that. Maybe a significant vulnerability. I don't know. One of the things we might talk about eventually is like this could potentially create some scenarios for non-technical people where they're, am I exposing my machine in some way in a very dangerous manner? I probably should know that and do a little bit more homework there. But, I went ahead and pursued that path because I really wanted this DocuSign integration to work. And this is the only way that they could do it. I do have this fear that I'm somehow creating some trouble here that I haven't seen just yet.
Yeah, I guess you go from trusting Mike and I to trusting this tool.
One thing that I've seen already is that I've been using a different tool recently, and it will happily insert API keys and secrets and passwords into code. It doesn't care. So if you're not careful about that kind of stuff and you check stuff in, you could easily get secrets in your repo.
Don't do that, kids. If you're listening to us and you don't know that, don't do that. Bob, tell us about what you've been building with, is it Claude Code you've been using or Cursor?
Yeah, I've been using Claude Code. I think when I rewind, I had a similar start. Actually, I think I was talking with you, Mike and Eric, about Copilot. And then I had seen that Copilot had this integration with OpenAI and it was in VS Code. And I was already familiar with VS Code and I thought this could be useful. And I kind of toyed with it. And it was like moderately disappointing. It was both magical, but moderately disappointing. You would start typing something and it would just start trying to type ahead of you and have these whole big blocks. And sometimes the blocks would end in a weird place and it would just stop, or you would say something. And as a quick sidebar, I had an idea in like 2019 about possibly, training some very simple language model at the time based on all GitHub Python repos that could just like take a doc string and turn it into code. And I kind of looked at that tool and was like, oh, this is that tool. This is like going to do that. This is going to be so great. Like I'll outline what I want to do and then it's going to fill in a bunch of the typing for me. And then I'm going to edit what it types and then I'm going to work on it. And I just found it completely unusable in a workflow. Like every time I tried to use it, I was like, this should really be helping me. But I think, Eric, I kind of communed with you at one point and you had a similar experience, which was like, I'm spending more time correcting what it's doing than I would have spent if I just wanted to write this correctly. I know what I want to write here. I already know what I want to put in here from coding. So why don't I like do that? And then I kind of, toyed around with it a little bit. But then this past, I guess, late winter, early spring, I had been reading more and more about Claude Code and how that worked. But even before that, I was just using LLMs through the web interface to write code. At some point, that tool became unlocked where I could say, write me a Python script that does X, Y, and Z. And I would describe it. The chatbot would go out and start writing this separate code block. And then it would give it back to me and say, use this, use this, use this. Someone else hinted me to the fact that I could give it code and say, hey, these are a couple of files I have. Now I want to extend it with X or I want to add Y. So I kind of had a little bit of this interaction. And then a colleague of mine, a former colleague of mine and good friend was like, hey, maybe you should try this Claude Code. Like I'll jump on a call with you and you can set it up. And I was kind of ignorant to the whole thing. He was like, okay, type this. Okay, type this. Okay, do this package install. Okay, now go here and like put your credit card in here to get an API key. All right, now paste that here. And like, he walked me through every step. Like in hindsight, I've now actually asked Claude to do that for me, and it will give me the sequence of steps and say, this is exactly what you have to do to set this up or change keys or change logins. But at the time, I was even helpless in that regard. I didn't even know that was a possibility. And then he was like, okay, what's your idea? And this was totally a greenfield thing. Like there was nothing in a repo. And he said, what do you want to do? Here's my proposed protocol for you. And so he kind of gave me a framework, and the framework was brainstorm with an LLM in the web interface and say, this is what I want to do. These are my objectives. Come up with a plan with milestones, with achievement goals, with testing outlines. And then I probably spent a couple hours going back and forth on like a master plan of like, this is the sequence I want to achieve. These are the things I want to do. And then he says, okay, now we're going to put this into a markdown document. We're going to drop it into your repo. And now we're going to go to Claude Code and say, start with this tiny little element in this first step, 0.1.1. I want you to write just that. Again, I think in a separate chat, sort of independently with Eric, I've communed on this idea that like, this is like having a really fast typing, overeager intern that's always available 24 hours a day and will do to the best of their ability exactly what you ask them to do, and will occasionally have no idea what you're asking, but will just come back with code anyway because you're like, I want you to go write this, and it'll come back and be like, I'm the intern, it's my job, I'm supposed to write you code here. This might be what you're asking me for or not. I don't know. When I view it that way, it makes it a lot easier for me to interact with it. I don't think of this tool as being a sophisticated developer, someone who's building me the best tool possible. I think of it as a junior person who's new to my organization, who's trying really hard to help me according to what I've told them so far. And that when they do it wrong, when the agent does it wrong, it's because I haven't told them what I wanted well enough. Like I really put the responsibility back on myself when I get these weird outputs. Oh, I didn't really tell them what I wanted, or they got confused. Because it's a bot and I can do anything I want, when it's going wrong, I just shut it down and I start a new one. It's like I hire a new intern. It's like, okay, that intern doesn't understand what I'm talking about. Let's start again. Let's begin again from zero. So that's kind of been my interaction so far.
I want to talk about a little bit about the state of the art on this and how it has rapidly evolved. Just a couple minutes here. So maybe 9 months ago, I was reading blog posts by people who are longtime software developers who were like, hey, I have this great workflow. You use a tool like Repo Mix. You go into your repo, you use Repo Mix to collapse that repo into one giant file that is easily ingestible by an LLM. You send that context to the LLM along with your prompt. You get an answer back. And that was like 9 months ago, probably not even a year ago. People were saying, this is the way to do this. And now Cursor and Claude Codex are wildly popular. And Copilot was seeming like this really kind of sometimes annoying, maybe mostly annoying autocomplete thing. And then I was talking to Kevin, showed me Cursor. I was blown away by what Kevin was doing with Cursor. I showed my colleagues at work a couple months ago. I went to go for a Google search for Cursor, top paid sponsored link, GitHub Copilot. That's what you want. I was like, wow, they're really worried about losing business to Cursor here. So I just have Copilot installed on VS Code, and they just updated it maybe a month ago, and suddenly Copilot is acting in a very Cursor way. It looks just like Cursor. It's spitting out CLI commands, and it's saying, do you want me to run this? And I click continue, and now I'm like, oh, I don't even need to download Cursor anymore. I just have that same functionality in Copilot. I think maybe with Cursor, you could talk to more LLMs than you can with Copilot. But that aside, these are the tools that people are using nowadays. And I wouldn't count Copilot out, not to get too tool oriented. I really want to get to what is good about these workflows, what is bad about them. And I sort of jokingly said the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we could talk about ugly too. Maybe bad and ugly are going to blend a lot. Kevin and Bob and Mike, what works? Why is this beneficial? Why does it improve productivity? Mike, what do you think?
My experience has been that when it helps substantially. You know, when you get something right, you end up saving hours. It's often stuff that I know how to do, I just don't want to do. So, you know, writing tests is a good case. It seems to be very good at writing Python PyTest tests. And I'm not sure exactly why it does so well. There seems to be something about it having the code that it's testing as context, or comments as context, or previous tests as context, that it very frequently gets tests correct on the first go, and also, you know, does a pretty good job of creating tests that actually run and pass.
What I'm hearing, Mike, is that 10% of the time, it's a 10x developer.
Yeah, so basically a wash. The other thing that I've discovered is that even when it's wrong, it's sometimes helpful. I think Kevin kind of hinted at this with some of the things he said as well, but there's cases where, like, I've seen other people do PRs who are not professional coders. So I'll just relay a personal experience I've had in the last couple of weeks. Somebody who I was working with, who is not a full-time coder, but is more of a product person, had written up a PR to change some queries in this data analysis pipeline. We ended up not using it. We abandoned that PR, but I was able to look at the discussion he had of what he was trying to accomplish and the SQL queries that it had created in the process. And I was like, okay, this is not exactly what I want. It's not going to accomplish the end that we need, but this is a really good starting point for me. And I can feed some of this. I can use some of my own experience on this, and I can feed some of this into LLMs and get more feedback on it. I've also found, like, I've been doing this thing that I kind of facetiously call vibe querying lately, where I do a lot of SQL queries or data frame manipulations and that kind of stuff. And you can go in this mode where you're like, this is what I have and this is what I want. It doesn't generally produce something on the first go, but you can have this discussion with it, which is not always perfect. But I've found that there's this sort of iterative thing you can go through where you're like, this is what I want, and it'll say, okay, here's some options. How about this? And then I'll be able to say, okay, not quite. That's not what I was getting at, but try this instead. And just this process of, I think it's particularly useful for me because, as many of you know, I am sort of hyper introverted. And so these things work for me as kind of like the pair programmer that I don't want looking over my shoulder under normal circumstances. So those have been my good experiences with it.
Kevin, again, your background's really interesting to me because, and I don't mean this as a put down or an insult, but you are not a professional developer, but you have quite a lot of knowledge about the process of professional development. You've worked with tons of software developers and you've guided software projects. And then you've also written a lot of software using low code and no code tools. What works for you with these tools?
Yeah, so I mean, my I guess my first reaction is I've in that process I've built a lot of bad software. Just the honest reality, things that don't work, right? Things that you put on a team and they work weeks on, and we put it out into the wild and it doesn't work, right? And so
these are traditional methods. You say using traditional methods, I have built total crap.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So now I can build crap and test it before I get other people involved in building that crap. I mean, that's just the reality of it, right? The feedback loop is just much better. So I can get to something working extremely quickly. And I think just one other example that comes to mind, I changed my mind. So I started building this, and I initially integrated with DocuSign, and then I was like, well, wait a minute, DocuSign is super expensive. Do I actually want DocuSign to be my core, platform? And so I went out and found another service that much more reasonably priced, and I'm like, okay, like great, I'm gonna have to like rip all this out and redo it. I had it working within an hour, maybe hour and a half. Brand new service. I pointed the API documentation. I got the key, and it was just I suddenly had a completely new service spitting out these documents for signature, which just felt like crazy to me. So that to me,
are you reading the code that it produces?
Am I reading it? I mean, not really, right? I mean,
I don't mean, I'm not trying to call you out. I'm just curious. Like, are you trying to read it?
No, I'm not really. I mean, the reality is not. Like, so the things that I pay attention to is I want to make sure that like they're not introducing weird data structures, right? So for example, I noticed once that it was starting to jam contact level information onto a company. I'm like, don't do that. Like let's keep these things split out. And so it'll go back in and make some adjustments, but this is just how I'm doing this. I'm looking for something functional. I'm not necessarily building software to sell. Maybe that's something in the future, but right now I get something functional that works. And if the code, I sort of assume the code maybe is a bit of a mess, behind the scenes, but I'm putting, there's an input and there's an output, and I like what comes out of the output. So that's
kind of like there's a whole lot of construction noises on the other side of this closet door, and stuff is like the plumbing is still working in my house, and the lights are on now. That's cool. So just keep going, guys. Keep working. You're doing a great job. Whoever's on the other side of that closet, keep on going. Bob, what do you think? What's good about it? You kind of hinted a little bit at this.
Yeah, I've had a couple of things that I think have been really good. One of them, kind of like Kevin says, or kind of like Mike said, actually, is that it's kind of like a pair programmer. Like, I don't get blocked anymore. There were definitely times in coding in the past where I would get to a point and I would look at what needed to happen next. And I would either say, I'm not really sure how to start this, or I would say, I can start this, but this is 3 hours of work. And I don't want to do that right now. That's just a lot. And that doesn't happen at all anymore. Now it's like, okay, the next thing. Like the reason I stopped coding is because it's time to eat a meal. It's time to go to bed. It's time to like I'm stopping, not because my pair programmer has stopped and not because I'm stuck. I know exactly what's going next. I know exactly what to try. And that's been really different for me. Like I feel like that's been a huge productivity boost, where in the past I would have a task and I would just put it off. I'd be like, that's just going to be 3 hours slog. Like, I just don't want to do it. Like, maybe I should go exercise or do something else. And maybe if I come back to it, I'll feel more motivated to actually do this. But since the typing is all happening by somebody else, it's really a different experience.
There's a lot of potential examples I could lob in there. These are maybe hypothetical examples, but to your unblocking story, if I'm really good at writing back-end code, but I need to see it, maybe I need a simple web interface. I don't necessarily want to write that web interface. So it'd be cool
Yeah.
to just have a tool just spontaneously generate one for me so I can validate that my backend stuff's working. Or maybe, and this is the case that shocked me with Kevin's thing, maybe I can write a full stack web application that's fine, but I have to get it running in order to actually use it. And I don't really want to get into deploying it. But oh, by the way, it'll just get it running on my machine. It'll use
Yeah.
ngrok for webhooks or whatever. Like that unblocking thing feels pretty magical.
Yeah.
Can you write a test for this? Okay, I'll write the test. I'll run the test. I'll evaluate why the test failed, and then I'll fix the test. That's kind of a crazy. It's got its own feedback loop. That's insane. It's not what I ever expected.
The other thing that I've really picked up on a lot, I'm a very visual person. I like seeing the diagram. I like seeing the output. I want to know what it looks like at every step as we go along. I read the code, but then I want to see it. And in the past, I would always get hung up in Python with matplotlib, and I would at the best I could do was create a crude diagram. And I would be like, this is enough. And in my head, I would be like, what I want is a scatter where you color the clusters and you label the groups, and then you give it to me in 3 different ways. And like, I would want that, but I would always be hung up on it. I would be like, okay, here's the crude thing. Those numbers look about right. I'm going to just move on because I don't want to do it.
That's a side quest for you, essentially.
It was always a side quest. It was never the tool I wanted, but it was always, it would have helped me all along the way to support the work I was doing. But I never wanted, like you're saying, spin up this little web service and like just show me that this works. Like it was a similar concept. And now I do it constantly. I'm always asking the tool, all right, give me a plot. Okay, give me another plot. Okay, now give me a new diagram. Okay, now give me another diagram. Show me where that data breaks or what's going on. I actually had a hilarious interaction where it thought it had explained something to me with a diagram. And I went back and said, I don't see it. What's going on? And it gave me back a diagram, again, like an intern, with a big arrow in it and a label on the arrow that said, this data point, exclamation point. And it pointed at the outlying data point. Like it was literally like having an intern, like giving me another plot on a PowerPoint saying, you idiot, this is what I showed you last time. Didn't you understand? So like,
let me Google that for you.
And that was, it's been so great for those use cases. And to go back to like what Kevin's saying, like I would say I'm reading 80% of the code it produces. Like everything it does for producing those plots for me, I don't read. I just don't care. Like I just want to see the plot. I don't care how it constructs that. But when it's doing what I think of as like the mainline critical code, I'm treating it as pair programming with someone where they did the typing and I have to understand what it does. And often I'll be okay with certain blocks of code. Oh, I know this, I know this, I know this. Okay, that's all right. You're reusing these things. But then I'll go through very critically and say, all right, this is the key part of the algorithm. Is this really right? Does this make sense to me? Like what's happening there and why? So I'm kind of in between like vibes and fast typist, you know, that's kind of how I'm falling between those two.
Mm-hmm. I think hidden in what all 3 of you have said, there are some kind of hidden gotchas or hidden maybe some negatives. And I don't think we'd be really honest podcast journalists. I put that in quotes. Actually, I'm kind of kidding, but I feel like we got to be honest with ourselves and also talk about what sucks about it. Bob, you want to jump in first?
I want to jump in because I think I have a applicable story. I was building like a neural net training pipeline as part of this project I've been working on, and
cool. Something
and I had
easy.
this thing.
I like it.
I mean, it's easy in the sense that there's a lot of examples everywhere. There's a lot of places. So I'm using this framework called PyTorch, and I want to generate some data, and then I want to load the data. I kind of let it get a little far ahead, and then I said, okay, run a training loop. I'll run the training loop, and I'm running the training loop, and the loss is going down. Everything looks like it's good. And I was like, okay, plot the validation data. And it was just plotting flat lines everywhere. And sometimes you get that when you're training a neural net and like things aren't linked up right and it'll just like produce zeros. So I started going through all the code, all the setup, trying to figure everything out. I kept not seeing it. And then finally I found out what had happened. I was like, maybe it didn't load the data. I'm like looking through the training loop. The training loop looked right. And I was like, wait a second, what's going on here? So it goes in the training loop, it pulls a batch of data, it loads the data from disk, it puts the data into the 2 vectors. And then I was like, wait, what are you doing? And I look, and it made a vector of zeros right before the training step. And then it fed zeros in.
Probably
It was
like, here's
like,
some helpful data in case this stuff doesn't load. This will
right.
work, right?
It was totally one of those things, again, the over anxious intern, where it was like, I know I need to load the data. Okay, now I need to run the training loop. It's not working. I'll just put zeros in and see if the
Yeah.
training loop works. Oh, it works. But then forgetting to tell you it was training on zeros. So that was an example where if I hadn't had experience in that field, and I would have just thrown my hands up and been like, I guess this doesn't work. I'm just going to give up on this whole world. So kind of like Kevin was saying about possibly injecting things that you don't understand or know, or security risks. Like if you're not tracking it, it can put all kinds of stuff in there that it thinks is helpful that could get you way off base.
I just want to clarify. I've never done any neural network stuff. You're saying if I had a vector of zeros that I'm training on, that's not really that helpful.
Not helpful.
All right, maybe Mike can teach me more about that later on. Kevin, what do you think? What's a down? Are there downsides for you?
I think there are downsides and there's risks here. We've already talked about the security one a little bit. So I think maybe just one story of something that I ran into, and I think I mentioned this one to you, Eric. I was trying to chase down this bug, and I could not get the system to like get the status to set the way that I wanted to. Every time I refreshed the page or did something, like it was just, I was chasing this thing all over the place, you know. It would fix it in one place and something else would break, and I just could not, and I was going around and around for a while, and eventually I figured out that what it was doing was it was just jamming a bunch of stuff in a local storage, you know. So I asked it, is there a technical reason for why you made that decision? It was like, oh, well, we're just rapid prototyping here. I'm like, well, no, that's not what I want to do. And I had to kind of redirect it back into like, I want to build something that actually I can use. It's like, oh, okay. And then it started to take another path, but you know, I lost hours trying to just track down that issue until we discovered that. So I think there's a lot of stuff like that kind of comes up.
That story sounds similar to Bob's. This tool was so eager to be helpful that any tiny little roadblock, it just jammed in a quick shortcut answer and then left that in there and never was self-aware enough. I mean, not at all self-aware. Mike, you had a similar story too, where recently that you told me, I think, yeah?
Probably the one you're referencing is I was working on a query that had a union in it. So there were two queries that were being unioned together to give me a set of data. I needed to change small parts of both of the individual queries. So I was working with, in this case, codecs. I basically needed to introduce an aggregation into these queries, and it got the aggregation correct. But in the process of producing the new query, it took the predicates in the where clauses of the two parts that were being union and swapped them.
It's a different Venn diagram, sounds like.
Yeah, the query still worked. So the query was still valid SQL, worked perfectly. But now I'm getting a totally empty set instead of what I expected to get. It just did not occur to me that the LLM would have done that. So I spent like an hour looking at it and trying to figure out what could possibly have made the difference. And when I realized that, I think what I've come to the conclusion here was that the LLM doesn't really understand the logic of the query. It doesn't know what's happening in the query. It's just trying to, produce similar patterns. In this particular case, it swapped things and it looked reasonable to me. It looked reasonable to the LLM. It was just something that was difficult to trace.
A strategy that I have learned that I would suggest anyone to try is when you have that problem, you feed what your current code is into like a web LLM that's completely independent of your coding one. And you say, tell me what this query does. Tell me what this code does. Summarize what's going on here. I've found that this idea of like summarization or transferring of style or pattern works really effectively. If I have a refactor, I've tried a couple times to describe my refactor, and it just is completely confused. It's botched it every time I've tried to describe it. But when I've taken my repo and I've created the file structure I want, and I've put some comments in those files, and then I've said, look at my file structure and my comments, put all my functions into the appropriate files and refactor, it's always gotten it right. It's like it needs enough hint on what you want with an example. Like there's something about examples for these LLMs that seem very valuable relative to just language questions that I have found are pretty good.
I think hidden in what you all are saying is the tendency for these tools to sometimes answer the wrong question. And I had that experience myself. I have really two comments, but I'm going to just have one here for now. I have a library that I use at work to publish background tasks. And we use like a queuing service in the cloud. We don't have a database inside this library. It's a library that gets loaded into apps, which may or may not have a database. And I wanted to build like more complex workflows. And I thought I kind of have an idea how I would do that. And it mostly involves adding a database. But I was curious what a tool like Cursor would suggest. I said, hey, Cursor, I've got this cool library. I can schedule background tasks for my web applications using this library. And I want to I want to start building more complicated workflows. You know, in industry speak, we call that a DAG, a directed acyclic graph. I want to do this, then do these 10 things, and then collapse down to this other thing. And it was like, oh, sure, I could do that. And it just spawned a dozen different Python modules and a few thousand lines of code. I was like, well, that's interesting. So I start reading the code. It does absolutely not answer the problem. It started building all this like cool interfaces about DAGs and like how to invoke them directly. And it has obviously no context that we're publishing these on a separate queue that's operated by a cloud service. Okay, that's fine. It doesn't have that. But it confidently answered absolutely the wrong
Yeah.
question. And I had to read it and very quickly come to the conclusion like, not going to work.
Another thing I've noticed is that you can sometimes see through to the training data. I'd mentioned to you that one of my sort of killer applications for these is reading query plans. So if you've ever looked at query plans from, say, Postgres, they can get really complicated, and even though they're text, they're hard for human beings to read. But I can drop one of those into Gemini, and it's just like, this is what it does. This is how you can fix it. This is how you can improve it. But one of the things I've seen is that very often it will look at a particular part of that and it will say, oh, you have a nested loop in this join. You need to fix that because joins aren't correct unless they're doing merge joins or hash joins. There are a lot of cases where doing a nested loop is a perfectly legitimate thing to do, probably the best thing because that's what the query optimizer picked. If you read articles on the internet about how to optimize joins, it always says you need to put indexes on these things so that they do merge joins and hash joins. And so you can sort of see that the LLM has read all of these articles and it's trying to tell you the thing that everybody else on the internet is telling you.
I've had an experience a few times where I have a class and it does something, and I think that it's obvious and implicit that what I want you to do is extend the functionality of the class. And I'll ask it to do that, essentially say, oh, I want to add this functionality. And it'll just say, I'm going to create a new class and I'm going to copy all this boilerplate over. And now I'm going to add your functionality to this new named class that's a clone of the old one that has no reference. I'm like, no. That's a terrible idea. Like, I can see why it does. It also seems to get obsessed with backward compatibility, which for me and like prototyping and like just trying to get stuff working drives me crazy. It'll do stuff like, oh, now that we're changing this, like I've thrown the old code away completely, but it remembers that we used to have these things. And it's like, oh, if this class ever gets called in this way, I need to make sure I handle that. So I'm going to just put all of this extra functionality in here to check these ways that things might get used so that it's always backward compatible. And I have to really push it to say, give up on that. We don't do that anymore. We're going to move on. So similar to like what Mike's saying.
I want to go to Kevin's example too, because Kevin, two things surprised me with your example. We asked it to refactor your app because I was trying to help you figure out if what you had was good. And it was hard for me to read because it wasn't like a traditional Python application. There was kind of code all over the place. And that's not a reflection on your work whatsoever. I mean, you're not really reading it. That's fine. And as it refactored it, it would kind of just spontaneously generate all kinds of new stuff, wouldn't move or delete old stuff, wouldn't reference existing stuff. It would just recreate, instead of importing a thing over here, it would just rewrite it over here. That surprised me. And then you and I were playing with it together for about an hour. It started referencing stuff that definitely did not exist in any file in front of us. And I suddenly realized, oh, we haven't committed. There's no like git commit here. So it's looking at like stuff that's in the git diff, which is hugely confusing that it would, like a human wouldn't do that. They're generally going to look at you look at the diff to see what did I change, but you're not going to be like, let me look at the diff to figure out how to answer the question you want me to do. And so we had to commit. Those were two things that really shocked me with your project.
Yeah, and it does stuff like it'll regularly just make up fields and assume that it's in there, and it'll insert it into a query, and It gets stuck several times before it figures, oh wait, that field doesn't actually exist, or it's a completely different name. It doesn't attempt to find out what the field is named or if it's there. It just sort of assumes and tries to go. That's a pretty
Or
regular
just
occurrence.
inventing APIs
Yep.
on libraries or even like cloud APIs or things too is pretty much a downside.
Yep.
So I had this broken up between the good, the bad, and the ugly. If we could do it ugly, for me, ugly is I'm more like what Simon Willison says. I am, and Mike, you would probably accuse me of this. I'm a bit of a perfectionist when it comes to code. And the reason I'm a perfectionist is I've been bitten so many times by writing a thing, and then 3 months later, somebody comes to me and says, why is it doing this? And if it's hard to understand, it's really hard for me to answer the question of why is it doing this in this scenario. And if there's a bug, it's really hard for me to rapidly fix it. So I get extremely particular about very minutia, stuff that most people don't care about. The formatting, the structure, logging, like very, very gnarly, tiny little details. I want it to look very, very good. And so I want to read everything. Mike, go jump in. You want?
I think you have a bit of a tendency too that is very contrary to the vibe coding ethos, which is you are a little bit of a premature optimizer.
Yeah, definitely am. Yes, I can cop to that.
And I think vibe coding is definitely not doing that for you.
I want to do it right immediately, perfect.
I'm really curious,
time.
Eric,
Go
if
ahead,
we
Bob.
sat down at another time and I went through a system prompt with you, I would bet you a couple dollars that I could get it to do what you want it to do at your level of specification if the system prompt going in said, I'm going to be super picky about this and this and this and this. And if you ever bring me code like this, I'm going to turn you off, and like a bunch of threats and like constraints. I know it sounds crazy, but it actually makes a big difference in the outputs that you get versus the generic prompt.
So I buy that, and I've seen it produce viable code, but here's what I'm getting to. I don't trust it if I haven't read it. And for me, the ugly downside is these tools produce a massive amount of code in a very short amount of time. And I don't trust that code unless I've read it. So now the burden is how, like the throughput of me being able to parse and understand mentally the code and evaluate it and run it and test it on my own. Because if you say to me, well, 25% of the time it's going to get it wrong, I'm not shipping something that has 25% of the chance of being wrong. And that means I got to read and understand and own. I have to own every line. So for me, that's the downside. And I'll give you one example. When I first downloaded Cursor to just play with, Kevin, you inspired me. I was like, I'll download Cursor. This is cool. Tool's crazy. I just was messing around. I opened a code base. I typed a single word to it. This is not an exaggeration. In the chat, I typed hello, and it just started whizzing. And it wrote 2 Python modules in response to me typing hello. I didn't ask it to do anything. It just started writing code. And I now had 800 lines of code to review that I don't even know what the point of it was. That's to me the ugly part.
I think
of this.
Some of that rhymes with me, which is I had the same experience that you were describing, that Kevin was describing, where it copied whole functions from one file to another file to another file instead of importing. That moderately pissed me off. That was definitely in the ugly category where I was like, are you doing anything here? Like, why are you doing this foolish copy paste into a new file, a new file, a new file? That was probably the top of my ugly list.
Mike and Kevin, what do you think?
I have sort of a philosophical question, and this is kind of directed at Kevin. So Eric had this idea that we talked about in one of our early podcasts where maybe the code doesn't matter. Kevin built a thing that works for him. He's productive with it. It does the thing he wants it to do. Does the code matter? We could maybe throw that code away and rebuild it again with a new tool and make it even more streamlined or something. So does humans being able to read and comprehend the code even matter if you're getting a functional thing out of it?
Yeah. Eric and I have talked about this a little bit too. I guess it depends on what you're trying to do with it. Like if it's just a little homegrown app that I use and only I use, it might be okay. I mean, if I wanted to extend it a little bit and all of a sudden stuff started breaking all over the place, or if it goes down for me and I've got all of my operations wrapped around it, yeah, it definitely matters. if it takes me days to figure out what's going on, or if there's a security vulnerability and somebody gets in and gets all of my data, like it matters. Yeah, but the story I use is I showed this to my brother who's in the same business, and his immediate reaction was like, "This is awesome. Let's launch it. Let's sell it." I'm like, "There's no chance that I'm shipping this at all anywhere other than my computer. It needs to be unvibed." Eric and I were texting one day. I'm like, "Actually, that's probably a business, like unvibing vibe code." Because I suspect what's going to happen is a lot of people are just going to create all these little homegrown apps. They're going to pop up all over the place. People aren't going to be thoughtful about like whether or not this thing actually should be used by people out there in the world, and there's just going to be all sorts of trouble that's created, and someone's going to have to go in there and clean that up. For me, that's kind of the ugly piece of it.
I actually want to call it devibing. I like devibing.
It's a good
better
good
than
business.
unvibe. But go ahead, Bob.
I have wondered sort of that philosophical question. Like, are we now moving into this world similar to moving from machine language to high-level programming? I'm sure that at that time, there were people that just stomped their feet. Like, if you're not writing to the register and you don't know the memory address, you are not programming. Like, you're just letting the machine allocate memory whenever it wants. Just does garbage collection on its own time. Like, you're crazy. This is not code. I can imagine there must have been some level of argument like that where like, the JVM, like this is heresy. We can't ever imagine this abstract machine that we run code on that runs on any platform. Like, this is a violation. I've wondered philosophically if we're moving to that next abstraction layer where it's like, the actual code that it's written in, it doesn't matter. It's like the machine language. It's like how it's getting compiled on a box. Anything that produces the result is sufficient. I don't have an answer, but I have had that thought.
Sometimes I wonder if four guys here talking about vibe coding in 2025 is like if you stumbled upon a podcast that was recorded in 1926 and there's four guys on there and they're talking about typewriter technology, like fervently discussing how typewriters are made to produce highly accurate text. What would be your take on that? It's kind of what I'm wondering. In 50 years, 75 years, 100 years, this sounds extremely like these guys cared about something that was rapidly becoming obsolete.
I think that's a good point. I mean, the reality is this stuff is just in its infancy, right? This stuff is brand new. We're playing with the baby toy right now. Like, it's not hard to imagine in 5 years that these things have just gotten remarkably more sophisticated, and all of these, concerns that I have, they're handled. One of the things that I wish these things did better was I ask it to do something, and no matter how stupid the idea is, it just wants to go and start doing it. I would much rather have someone say, you know what, actually, that's not a great idea. Here's why, or here's some things that you should think about. There's no sort of control there that's sort of tapping the brakes a little bit. But it's not hard to imagine that being where this all heads eventually.
I will jump in there, Kevin, and say that there's a way you can manipulate these tools to kind of do that, which I've discovered sort of the hard way, which is that these tools all are built on chatbots. Chatbots are all fine-tuned to please the requester. So what you can do is you can invert it, and you can say, hey, you can literally make the prompt this. Hey, I got this idea from my friend, and I think it's terrible, but I'm not sure why. Can you help me think through what would be totally wrong or bad about this? And now it's satisfying you by finding the holes, by taking the other side of your idea. And I've done that a few times, and it completely tears it apart. It's like, oh, this is wrong, and that's wrong. You can't make that assumption, and you wouldn't want to structure it this way. Sometimes it goes too far, but it can give you that skeptical view if the way you request it is in that skeptical way.
That's so meta, Bob, because it's still going to start off with, you are absolutely right. You are a genius for critiquing your friend, and it's just going to be so sycophantic the entire time to whatever it thinks you want to hear. And if you're not somebody who really wants to hear sycophancy, it
Eric,
could get a little
such a
bit
genius.
tiresome.
That's such a great insight.
Karpathy talks about that a little bit in his latest talk, where he says that, what we're evolving toward now is we're not programming machines, we're programming the LLMs, where we're trying to send input into them now, which is our program, to get back what we want. And so it's really sort of a new software paradigm.
I think the looming question for me, which we haven't totally answered, but hints maybe that it's possible you won't have to, is will a human have to read the code someday? And if so, then you probably still need software development practices. You still need Git. You still need the organization of code. You still need modules and packages and whatever else. But it's possible that a human may not have to read the code, that just sort of seeing it run somehow is good enough. Seeing the diagrams Bob described, seeing the web application that Kevin built is good enough. And I got to say that there's it's the trusting trust thing, right, Mike? If I say, build me a diagram of what you've done, do I then trust the diagram? My trust is removed a layer from the actual source material. That's the part that gives me a little bit of there's a ghost in there, and I'm
so then I guess I have to kick it back to the philosophy questions about what is the epistemology? How do we know what we know? How do we know that any of it is true, and at what level?
You're saying I have to read Kant in order to know if the LLM's producing
I think Kant and Plato,
junk.
right?
Kevin, how do you know that it works? Your web application, how do you know that it works?
Well, I know exactly what I want it to do, so I know what the output looks like. I mean, I take an action, and if the output matches what I expect, that's working.
Maybe there's a consistency aspect. Repeatedly, you get the same type of it's not just a one-time thing.
For sure.
It's not just, well, I know he wants to see some data in the database, so I'm just going to insert a whole list of zeros in there, and we're good.
Yep.
I have this feeling that the tools will get better. They'll incorporate reinforcement learning and evolutionary methods, and the feeling that you need to read the code to be able to trust what it's producing will decrease over time. But there will still be these guys who are kind of like the equivalent of electrical engineers with oscilloscopes. There's always going to be these hyper specialists who are going to be there to probe into things when something happens that's weird and nobody can understand it, and you just need something to liaison between the robot and the human world.
There's not that many of those guys, though, right, Mike? Am I wrong there, Bob? Are there a lot of that? There aren't that many of those oscilloscope readers, are there?
I expect to be retired by that point, so it really doesn't matter to me.
You're taking a pass on this question. Kevin, you're going to hire people like us in the future to help you understand what you got? You're going to deploy this thing and need help?
I think so. I will. Yeah, I will. And I wouldn't... Could I deploy it without getting someone like you all involved? I could. I'm not going to. I know it's fraught enough that it needs...
Too scary.
Yeah, it needs some attention for sure. Yes, I would. I think the other thing that I think about a little bit is just generally development, how development changes with these sorts of things. There's this sort of product team notion where the product team is really like this product manager, a software engineer, and a designer. And that's a concept someone named Teresa Torres kind of came up with and has been advocating for. But the whole idea is this team works together to basically tee up what needs to be, the high impact work that needs to be built by the development team. But I think this sort of changes things a little bit where that team can actually not only figure out what to build and how to build it, but can build it quickly and get it out. And so just the number of people that you need and how fast it just completely changes. So I would feel much better if I had an engineer overseeing how this sort of comes together.
Kevin, when you used to come to Mike and I and say, hey, I have this idea, I want to build this, how long will it take? And I had to give you a disappointing answer, I would feel kind of bad about that. It's going to take a while, but I would also feel good about it. Here's a person who needs me. I am needed. I am important. My work involves some form of expertise that they need. And you're threatening that a little bit. You're going faster. You're going around me. That's good. I like that. I like you unblocking yourself. I still want to be needed, Kevin.
I can say you're needed without a doubt.
I know we're getting pretty long here, but I guess one thing I would like to add to the ugly list also is just the astonishing amount of electricity these things take to run without an absolutely clear benefit yet.
Okay. Final thoughts, Bob, Mike, and Kevin. What is your approximate productivity boost? Subtracting, you got to also subtract your, what is I have to correct it, it did the wrong thing, and nobody's going to hold you to this. Bob, go first. How much do you gain?
I'm
How
about
much do you lose?
2 to 5 times faster.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And you're pretty
I've always
slow,
been very
so-
slow at doing
Sorry,
it.
I'm
I've
just
always
kidding. You're
been very
not slow.
slow at doing it, so it's been a huge speed up. And my other final thought I want to put out there is that
I don't think you're slow.
However much people think that they're using this, they're not using it enough. You should try hard to use it 5 times more than you think you're currently using it. Whatever level you're at, you should push yourself.
Jeez.
Ask it questions.
Mike, what do you think? What do you gain? What do you lose? Final thoughts. And Bob sounds kind of crazy to me. 5 times more than I'm using it. That's your clipboard of topics.
I'm definitely not getting the multiplier that Bob is getting, and I don't know if it's because I'm too skeptical or what. But I'm probably getting somewhere between 1.2 and 1.5 boosted productivity, and a lot of it is eliminating what I consider to be boilerplate type stuff. I would say that I kind of agree with what Bob is saying in the sense that at the stage we're at in using these things, I'm trying to get past the sort of mental block I have, which is I know how to do that. I'm just going to do it, and get into a mindset of let me see how it would do it first. I'm trying to get to that now where I try out the code assistant before I even make any decisions about how I want to do something. And I don't know if in the long run that's going to be a good thing, but it prompt me to make myself comfortable with the tools.
I probably like you, Mike, 20 to 40%, I would say. Your last comment there reminded me of a worry that I've seen reported on, which is that when you give college students these tools, they offload thinking to them more and more. And so they offload criticality. I don't feel qualified to really comment on that or come to conclusions about it, but that's scary. If so, like, if I get used to using this tool, then I just will stop doing the critical thinking, and I'll just constantly ask the tool to do that. I don't think you would do that, Mike, but that's a little worrying. Kevin, you get the final word on this. What do you think?
Yeah, so my calculus is different. I don't measure my productivity by how much code I can produce. It's how much time am I saving in the work that I do. So just as the first example that I talked about, the waiver signature process, I was spending, a day and a half, 2 days on that a month, just with all of the contracts we have in place. That's a couple hours now, a month max. And that's mostly just me going in and clicking a button when I get it back to make sure it's quality control rather than like actually going through and putting these things together. So immediate savings there for me. I think longer term, like I may be able to unseat the system that we're using currently that we're paying, several $1,000s a month for to use something, so there's dollar savings there too eventually if we decide to go that path.
Jobs eliminated.
Probably.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, it helps me not hire, so if we get, if we're 5 times the size we are right now, I don't need another person to push the button, move the papers around, right? So it definitely helps us stay lean as a company.
Mm-hmm. And you have a very small company, just you and your brother and
one
maybe
other guy,
one assistant.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you guys very much for joining us. Your experience here is fascinating. And I think the only other thought that I have is, in a year, are we going to sound silly with the conclusions we've drawn? Maybe it'll be fun to listen to in a year and be like, wow, look how off we were and how fast things moved. So, Bobak, Farzin, thank you so much for joining us. It was great to have you on the show again. And Kevin, wonderful to have you on first time. It was great to have you. And in the future, we might have you on again. You can talk to us about working with software teams and product development. And also we could check in on your project to see how it's going.
I love that.
So this has been Picture Me Coding with Eric Aker and Mike Mull. We will see you again soon. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.
See you next time.